So Danny, how are you seeing organizational shifts in companies looking to be agentic ready?
One of the shifts I've seen is kind of the death of the digital innovation lab concept when it comes to AI, like treating AI like it's an experiment or a cool experiment that can't touch the actual P&L. This is real now, where we've launched protocols out in the wild, and so this is actually kind of smashing that silo concept, and they've realized that agentic commerce is not an R&D project anymore. It's an actual sales channel. Um, and in practice, data has become so important. So I'm seeing a lot of cross-functional alignment on data quality. It used to be like marketing, for example, owned like product descriptions and things that would be rendered out on the web. Whereas now it's really because of things like AEO and GEO, there's a lot more tech involvement, chief digital officers and things of that nature that are really focused on data quality, working hand in hand with marketing. So, for example, sales used to own the inventory feed, and they rarely talked. You know, these were silos. Now everyone has to come together in a cross-functional manner because this new channel demands that we have real-time access to product catalog data, inventory data, things of that nature. And so data quality is of the utmost importance. So, and the biggest role in the C-suite I've seen is in the chief digital officer. So it's not necessarily just a compliance role anymore. They actually now have a revenue quota. They're responsible for grounding the truth across this cross-functional enablement that I'm talking about for data. And they have to really focus on things like preventing AI hallucinations. If your data is messy, your new best salesperson, which is the AI agent that's out there helping you represent your product in the world, it literally can't do its job if the data isn't of high quality. So I think that's the biggest alignment I've seen is cross-functional alignment on data integrity, and then chief digital officers shifting more to be having revenue stream responsibility versus just in the past, they were more like a risk engine, if you will,
Yeah.
or risk prevention engine.
And you talk about the emergence of this agentic product manager as a new role. Can you tell us what they do, what they focus on?
Traditionally, product managers for e-commerce companies, they owned the pixels. You know, they cared about the UI, button placement, you know, customer journey on a screen. An agentic PM owns the logic. They care about API efficiency, data structure, things that agents care about, right? The success rate of non-human transactions. The day-to-day it's fundamentally different. Instead of like A/B testing a landing page, they're A/B testing API prompts in their open AI or open API.yaml file to see if ChatGPT converts better with instruction A versus instruction B. So it's just a very fundamental shift between, again, thinking about user experience and pixels and how things are organized for a human versus how things are represented efficiently for an agent. So they're monitoring things like latency, hallucination rates, instead of bounce rates. Product managers in e-commerce were worried about, is my customer bouncing? Is my conversion rate going down? You're bridging this gap. This agentic PM is bridging the gap between the engineering team and the marketing team, and then translating brand voice into machine readable instructions.
And what do you think about in this role and in this new agentic era, when we think about the guardrails of unpredictability in agents, can you talk to us more about how we can think about enabling more guardrails?
We always like to think of like nightmare scenarios, right? We start with that and then work backwards. So if you imagine like a buyer agent, a ChatGPT, if you will, running on old data, it's convinced that your $500 product is on sale for $50. And it starts hitting your API repeatedly trying to check out at that $50 price point. And it's clogging your system, it's triggering fraud alerts because the amounts don't match, right? So in a standard setup, your system just blocks the IP, but that IP might be ChatGPT, which is also trying to buy correctly for 1,000 other customers. So you can't just block like OpenAI's IP range. So with shared payment tokens, which is what Stripe has invented as part of the Agentic Commerce protocol, you can set financial governance with context mapping inside of a rule. So if the price variance, for example, is greater than 10%, in that example, the price variance was $500 to $50, you can auto reject and send a specific error message updating the price. So if the agent has a bad data on the price, you can actually talk to the agent and say, no, we've got an updated price because your variance was more than 10%. Update the price, try the transaction again. So the best way to implement guardrails in agentic commerce is through basically context mapping. An agent's going to try and do exactly what it's been told to do, but it may not have all of the context. It may have erroneous context, thinking that a product is priced differently than what it actually is. So governance is really making sure that merchants and agents have a protocol that they can speak on a common language and make sure those updates are happening in real time.
The Stripe Agentic Commerce Suite, what problem is this solving today?
I like to call it protocol fragmentation. Right now, if you're a merchant and you want to sell on OpenAI, you need to speak Agentic Commerce Protocol, which is what Stripe co-authored with OpenAI. If you want to sell on Google, you might need Universal Commerce Protocol or other specific content APIs. So you need a secure way of both tokenizing your payments, so a bot can operate inside those guardrails that we talked about, but you also want to basically be able to represent your product in multiple AI channels like Perplexity, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, and across multiple protocols like ACP and UCP. Agentic Commerce Suite abstracts all of that. So you integrate your product catalog and your checkout logic once with Stripe, and then we handle the protocol translation, the shared payment token issuance for every major AI platform. You can almost think of us as like the Duolingo of like being able to translate your product catalog specs into all the different AI agents and the languages and specifications that they understand. So you integrate once with Stripe, and we help you sell in all these different AI channels and across all these different protocols. So the problem it solves is basically, I would say, protocol and agent fragmentation.
And it supports both UCP, which is the Google protocol, and ACP.
We launched with support with ACP. We are working with Google. UCP is very new, so it's only been out since January. So we're already working closely on being able to host both UCP and ACP endpoints. The timeline on that is still to be determined, but yes, that is our mission, is to be that translation layer across both protocols and across all the AI services.
And how does the product catalog flow work? Can you walk us through what that looks like with the Agentic Commerce Suite?
Actually, surprisingly simple. We've got a couple of different methods. So we have Stripe has a dashboard where you can literally just upload your CSV file. And probably for a developer audience, what we're going to care more about is API. So you can push your products to Stripe using the standard Stripe Products API. So basically you define your name, description, images, metadata, everything that you would see in a typical product catalog feed. Attach your prices. It's very crucial that you ensure that the active status is true so agents can discover them. And then you're going to feed that via our file API. So it's going to create a file object, and it's going to return a product catalog import status, because it's very important. Some of these product catalogs are very big. We have millions of SKUs sometimes. So when you're interacting with the API, we're giving you constant feed status updates and listen events, webhook events, so you can check for errors, invalid SKUs, things of that nature. And once it's verified, Stripe will handle the translation, as we talked about earlier, into the different protocols. But think of it as an API file object. You're saying, here's my import file. You import that. It's going to run through and check each product SKU for accuracy. And then if there's any errors, it will return an error file. You parse the error file, fix the errors, retry. So it's iterative logic, but it's actually a very simple API call to start the process.
You mentioned the SBT, the shared payment token, as one of the core components of the Agentic Commerce Suite. Can you walk us through the difference between an SBT and maybe a tokenized payment on Stripe?
Yeah, great question. So tokenized payment is basically just, a tokenized payment method that you have on file. And what you don't want to do in agentic commerce is give your credit card to an agent and say, just go out and purchase something with no guardrails in place. The example I always like to give is like, if you tell an agent, I want to buy a model airplane, and it hallucinates and tries to buy a real airplane, and it drains your bank account. Or if I'm buying like, a Halloween costume for my dog and it's $10 and it hallucinates and spends $1,000, no one wants that. That's a bad experience, right? So what agents need are context. So I like to refer to a shared payment token as context wrapping around a tokenized payment method. So you'll have your payment method on file with OpenAI or Perplexity or whoever you're using, and you're going to be trying to purchase something. And as soon as you click buy, we're minting a shared payment token. Inside that context will be a budgeted amount. So in the model airplane example, if we have like, $20, that amount cannot be exceeded. So you're basically saying that this is your budgeted amount. We also have built-in fraud signals powered by Stripe Radar. So a really important part of the protocol, and what merchants really care about, is this new era of agentic fraud. Human fraud signals are not as relevant anymore. Human fraud signals are based on the number of clicks that you're doing, the behavior that you're showing on a website, whether or not you pass the CAPTCHA and things like that. This is not relevant to an agent. They're not clicking on websites. They're actually hitting your product catalog API. So the fraud signals we send are very important. Things like, has this card been used for card testing in the past? Have there been fraudulent disputes on the card? There's a bot score that we calculate now that says whether or not this is a good or bad bot, if it has a history of being used in bad bot activities. These are very important things that we pass inside the shared payment token. So that's the second thing, budgeted amount, fraud signals. The third thing is built-in expiry. So we want to make sure that this token is never reused. So it's tied to this transaction only. If something goes wrong, it will time out. And you can control the time that it's live. I believe the default's like 10 minutes, but basically we want to make sure that this token is tied to this transaction and doesn't get reused possibly in any other scenario. So the three main pieces of context are budgeted amount, the guardrail that you can't exceed, fraud signals powered by Stripe Radar, and the built-in expiry, so the tokens expire.
Where can developers go to learn more about how to get started?
Two places. So one is agenticcommerce.dev. This is the documentation we co-authored with OpenAI for Agentic Commerce Protocol. And then also we've got on docs.stripe.com, there's an Agentic Commerce tab now that has a couple of different solutions, including like machine payments that we talked about, and also how to onboard with Agentic Commerce Suite. So it's all on docs.stripe.com.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. Looks like there's a lot happening, and thank you for keeping us updated. See you next time.
Thanks for having me.